They call it the panopticon effect. It's a psychological term I learned during my training. It's the idea that if people think they are being watched, they will behave. But nobody tells you what happens to the person doing the watching. When you sit in a dark room for 12 hours a night staring at a wall of 20 monitors watching empty hallways, eventually the silence starts to look back at you. I work security at what is now called the Metro North Archives, but locals still call it by its real name, St. Raphael's State Institute. It was a mental health facility built in the 1920s, notorious for its experimental identity wards. I read the old files sometimes when I'm bored. The doctors here believed that schizophrenia and dissociation could be cured by forcing patients to confront their own reflections. They lined the basement corridors with floor-to-ceiling mirrors. They would lock patients in there for days, forcing them to stare at themselves until they supposedly reintegrated their personalities. Instead, most of them just screamed until they lost their voices. The mirrors were removed in the 90s, but the basement still feels uncrowded. My job is strictly monitoring. I sit in the command center on the ground floor. It's a secure, windowless bunker filled with server racks and a bank of high-definition monitors that cover every inch of the facility. I am the only person in the building from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. Last Monday started like any other shift. It was raining hard, and the thunder was shaking the old foundation. I was drinking my coffee, watching the screens cycle through their feeds. Kitchen, loading dock, lobby, basement hallway A, basement hallway B. Around 2 a.m. I noticed movement on monitor 12. Monitor 12 covers the mirror ward, that basement corridor I mentioned. It's a long, narrow, concrete tunnel. I leaned in, squinting. The camera is night vision, so everything is in that ghostly green and black. At the far end of the hallway, a figure was walking away from the camera. My first instinct was annoyance. I thought it was a homeless guy who had broken in through the storm drains. I grabbed my radio. "Security to Central," I muttered out of habit even though I was the only one there. "I have a 1031 in the basement investigating." I watched the screen, waiting for the figure to turn a corner so I could intercept him. But then, I noticed something about the way he was walking. It wasn't the shuffled, hesitant walk of a vagrant. It was a confident, rhythmic stride. He was wearing a uniform. My stomach dropped. I looked closer. He was wearing dark tactical pants, black boots, and a uniform shirt with patches on the shoulders. It was my uniform. I froze. Is there a shift overlap? I asked myself aloud. I checked the schedule. No, I was the only guard on the payroll tonight. The figure on the screen reached the end of the hall and stopped. Slowly, deliberately, he turned around to face the camera. I stopped breathing. The face on the monitor was grainy and green, but I knew it better than anyone else's. It was my face. It wasn't just a resemblance, it was me. He had my buzz cut. He had the same scar over his left eyebrow from a childhood bike accident. He was even wearing my watch. But there was one difference. I was sitting in the command center, terrified, with my mouth dry. The man on the screen was smiling. It was a wide, predatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked directly into the lens, as if he could see me watching him through the fiber optic cables. He raised his hand and gave a little wave. Then he pointed to his left, to a door marked Stairwell B. I knew that stairwell. It leads directly up to the ground floor, to the hallway right outside my office. The screen flickered, and he was gone. I frantically scanned the other monitors. Where did he go? 10 seconds later, movement on monitor 7, the first floor hallway. There he was, my double. He was walking faster now. He wasn't looking at the cameras anymore. He was focused. He was heading straight for the command center. I stood up, backing away from the desk. My mind was racing. Is this a prank? Did someone hack the feed? Is this a deep fake? But then I heard it. Thump, thump, thump. Heavy bootsteps on the linoleum floor outside my door. I looked at the live feed on monitor 1, the camera right outside my door. I saw the back of his head. I saw my head. He was standing right there, just inches of steel and drywall separating us. I watched on the screen as he reached out his hand toward the door handle. At the exact same moment in the real world, The handle of the door I was staring at began to turn. Screech. The metal groaned. The lock was engaged, but the handle was being forced down with incredible strength. I looked back at the monitor. The me on the screen wasn't smiling anymore. His face was pressed against the door, his expression blank, dead. He wasn't blinking. I grabbed the emergency phone to dial 911, but the line was dead. "Let me in," a voice said from the other side of the door. It was my voice, but it sounded wrong. It sounded like a recording played backward and then forward again. I forgot my keys. "Let me in, John. We have work to do." I backed into the corner, drawing my baton, shaking uncontrollably. I watched the handle turn and turn, and then abruptly, it stopped. The footsteps walked away. I watched monitor 1. The hallway was empty. I watched monitor 7. Empty. I tracked him, or it, all the way back to the basement. I watched my double walk back into the mirror ward, turn to the camera one last time, put a finger to his lips in a shh motion, and step into the darkness where the old mirrors used to be. I didn't leave the room until the sun came up and the relief guard knocked on the door. When I opened it, he looked at me and asked, "Rough night? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't tell him. I couldn't. But before I left, I checked the logbook. There was an entry signed out at 3:00 a.m. The handwriting was mine, but I hadn't touched the book all night. Psychologists say seeing your own doppelganger is an omen of death. I think it's something worse. I think it's an attempt to replace you. If you were locked in a room and saw yourself trying to break in, would you open the door to see if it was real, or would you hide? Let me know in the comments. If you grew up in the Rust Belt, you know that these old steel mills aren't just buildings. They are graves. My grandfather worked in this mill back in the 1950s, back when the sky over the city was permanently gray from the smokestacks. He used to tell me stories about the quota. The management didn't care about safety, they only cared about tonnage. If a man lost a finger, they wrapped it up and kept the line moving. If a man fell into the slag pit, well, there wasn't much left to bury. The mill has been shut down for 30 years now. It's a rusting skeleton of iron and concrete spanning 50 acres of dead weeds and broken glass. My job is security. Basically, I sit in a small, glass-walled guard shack at the main gate to make sure copper thieves don't strip the place bare. It's an easy job, but it messes with your head. The isolation out here is absolute. You are surrounded by these massive, silent machines that look like sleeping giants. Last Thursday was a rough night. I had been pulling double shifts to pay off some debts and I was exhausted. The heating unit in the shack was humming, creating this white noise that was hypnotic. Against my better judgment and against strict protocol, I let my eyelids droop. I didn't mean to sleep, I just wanted to rest my eyes for a minute. I drifted off. I don't know how long I was out. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. But I was woken up by a sound that cut through my sleep like a gunshot. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp, heavy raps on the glass right next to my ear. I jolted awake, knocking my coffee cup over. My heart was pounding. It was pitch black outside, except for the single yellow floodlight above the gate. Standing on the other side of the glass, maybe 6 inches from my face, was a man. He didn't look like a copper thief. He wasn't wearing a hoodie or a mask. He was wearing old gray coveralls that looked stiff with grease and soot. His face was pale, almost waxy, and he had dark smudges under his eyes that looked like bruises. He wasn't trying to open the door. He was just standing there staring at me with a flat, expressionless gaze. I grabbed my radio, my hand shaking. I didn't open the door. "Can I help you?" I yelled through the glass. "This is private property, you need to leave." The man didn't blink. He tilted his head slightly to the side, like a bird listening for a worm. "Has the whistle blown?" he asked. His voice was muffled by the glass, but it sounded dry, raspy. "What?" I asked, confused. "The whistle," he repeated. "The line stopped. The foreman said the line stopped. Did the whistle blow?" I stared at him. The factory hadn't had a working whistle or a line since 1994. "Listen, buddy," I said, trying to sound authoritative. "There is no line. The mill is closed. You are trespassing. I'm calling the police." He didn't seem to hear me. He leaned closer to the glass. His breath fogged up the window pane. "It's cold in the pit," he whispered. "We need to get the heat back up. Why aren't you watching the gauges?" "I'm warning you." I stood up, putting my hand on my belt where I keep my mace. "Back away from the booth." The man stopped talking. He just smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a wide, tight grimace that showed teeth that looked too long. "You look tired, John," he said. My blood froze. "I don't wear a name tag. I've never seen this guy in my life." "You look so tired," he said again. "You should sleep. We all sleep eventually." Then he simply took a step back into the darkness. He didn't run. He just stepped out of the pool of light from the floodlight and vanished. It was like the shadows swallowed him whole. I waited for 10 seconds, heart hammering. Then I threw the door open and shined my flashlight around the perimeter. Nothing. The gravel lot was empty. The gate was still chained shut. There was no car, no footprints, no sign of anyone. I locked the door again and sat down, trembling. I needed to file an incident report. I needed proof. If I told my boss a crazy guy in vintage clothes knew my name, he'd think I was drinking on the job. I pulled up the CCTV system on the computer. I have a camera mounted on the roof of the shack that points directly at the door and the window where the man was standing. I rewound the footage to 10 minutes ago. I watched the timestamp. 3:14 a.m. I saw myself asleep in the chair, head slumped forward. 3:15 a.m. I saw myself jolt awake, knocking over the coffee cup. I looked terrified. I saw myself jump up and turn to the window. I saw myself yelling, "Can I help you? This is private property." My mouth moved on the screen. I was screaming at the glass. But there was nobody there. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. On the screen, the space outside the window was empty. Just the gravel and the night. I watched myself arguing with thin air. Has the whistle blown? I must have imagined the voice. "You look tired, John." My own brain playing tricks on me. I watched myself threaten to call the police on a patch of empty air. I looked like a lunatic, a man having a psychotic break in a lonely box in the middle of nowhere. I paused the video. I put my head in my hands. "I'm losing it," I whispered. "The isolation is finally getting to me. I need to quit." I was about to turn the monitor off when something caught my eye. Not on the screen, but on the window itself. The sun was just starting to come up, casting a gray light over the mill. And there, on the thick safety glass of the booth, right where the hallucination had been standing, was a mark. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. It was a handprint, but it wasn't my handprint. It was on the outside of the glass, and it wasn't made of sweat or oil from a living person's skin. It was a thick black smear of heavy industrial grease and coal dust, the kind of sludge they used to lubricate the blast furnaces back in the 50s. I looked back at the monitor. The screen showed an empty lot. The camera saw nothing, but the glass remembered him. I cleaned the window this morning. I scrubbed it with bleach, but the grease is thick. It doesn't want to come off. And honestly, I don't think I'm coming back tonight to try again. The camera doesn't lie, but neither does that handprint. I'm terrified that I might be losing my mind, but I can't explain the grease. If you saw yourself talking to no one on a tape, but found physical evidence that someone was there, would you trust your eyes or the machine? What would you do? Let me know. They say that you can renovate a building, but you can't renovate the soil it sits on. I never really understood what that meant until I started working the graveyard shift at the Blackwood Corporate Center downtown. On the surface, it's a modern, sterile masterpiece. Glass walls, marble floors, motion sensor lights, and expensive art in the lobby. It houses law firms and tech startups. But anyone who has lived in this city for more than 20 years knows what this building used to be. Before the glass facade and the Starbucks in the lobby, this structure was the main wing of St. Jude's Sanitarium. Back in the 1950s, St. Jude's wasn't exactly known for its ethical treatment of patients. There are stories, rumors mostly, about what happened on the upper floors. They say the doctors there were obsessed with order and structural discipline. They performed experimental lobotomies and prolonged isolation therapy to rearrange the minds of the patients. The asylum was shut down in 1984 after a patient uprising, and the building sat rotting for a decade before the developers bought it. They gutted the inside, slapped up some drywall, and called it a luxury office space. But at 3 a.m. when the lawyers go home and the air conditioning hums into silence, the drywall feels very thin. You can still feel the heaviness of the place. It feels like the building is holding its breath. I've been the head of night security here for 8 months. I'm a rational guy. I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in trespassers and faulty wiring. But last Tuesday changed everything. It was a quiet night. I was doing my rounds on the 20th floor. This floor used to be the hydrotherapy ward back in the asylum days, but now it's the executive suite for a high-end investment firm. It's the most expensive real estate in the city. I reached the main conference room at the end of the hall. It's a massive room with a 40-foot glass wall overlooking the city skyline. In the center, there is a 20-foot-long mahogany table surrounded by 12 heavy, black leather executive chairs. These aren't cheap office chairs on wheels. They are heavy, solid wood and leather that weigh about 50 pounds each. Part of my job is to make sure the room is prepped for the morning meetings. I walked in, checked the windows, and straightened the chairs. I'm a bit obsessive about it. I lined them up perfectly. 6 on the left, 6 on the right, tucked in tight against the table. The room was pristine. I walked out, closed the heavy oak door, and locked it with my master key. I heard the deadbolt click. I tested the handle. Locked tight. I turned around and started walking back toward the elevators. The hallway was silent, just the sound of my boots on the carpet. I was maybe 30 feet away from the door when I heard it. Boom. It wasn't a small sound. It sounded like a car crash. A massive, deafening collision of wood and metal coming from inside the room I had just locked seconds ago. The floorboards actually vibrated under my feet. My first thought was that the giant glass window had shattered. I grabbed my flashlight and baton, spun around, and sprinted back to the door. My heart was hammering in my throat. I reached the door and grabbed the handle. It was still locked. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking, and unlocked the deadbolt. I threw the door open, ready to confront an intruder or see a broken window. I stopped dead in my tracks. The breath left my lungs in a sharp gasp. The window was intact. The room was freezing cold, much colder than the hallway. But that wasn't what terrified me. The table was empty. All 12 heavy leather chairs were gone from the floor. They were stacked in the center of the mahogany table. But they weren't just thrown there. They were constructed. They formed a perfect, impossible spiral tower. One chair balanced precariously on top of the arms of the other, rising 10 feet into the air. The legs of the top chair were scraping against the ceiling tiles. I stood there, paralyzed. My brain couldn't process the physics of it. To lift those chairs and stack them like that would take 3 strong men and at least 20 minutes of careful work to keep them balanced. I had been gone for 30 seconds, and I had heard only one crash. There was no way a human could do this. There was no way physics could do this. I stepped into the room, my flashlight beam shaking as I traced the tower of chairs up to the ceiling. The silence was absolute. And then, I saw it. The chair at the very top of the tower. It was moving. It was rocking back and forth ever so slightly with a rhythmic squeak. 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 It was the only sound in the room. It sounded like someone was sitting in it, rocking back and forth, enjoying the view from the ceiling. I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave. But then the conference phone, which was buried somewhere at the bottom of that impossible pile of furniture, lit up. The green light flashed in the darkness. Ring. It wasn't an external call. The display screen glowed through the gaps in the chair legs. It showed the extension number calling. It was calling from the security desk in the lobby. My desk. The desk that was currently empty 20 floors below. I didn't answer it. I didn't try to take the chairs down. I backed out of the room, locked the door, and took the stairs all the way down. I sat in the lobby with all the lights on until the sun came up. I looked up the history of the 20th floor the next morning. It turns out the hydrotherapy ward wasn't just for baths. It was where the doctors forced patients to stand still in unnatural positions for hours, stacking them in crowded rooms to test their spatial discipline. They treated them like objects, like furniture. I still work here. I need the money. But I don't check the conference room on the 20th floor anymore. If they want to rearrange the furniture, I'm going to let them do it. I just hope they never decide to rearrange me.